Are you afraid to set boundaries with others? Do you fear that if you set them, the other person might be angry with you, disappointed, or disapprove of you? And so, therefore, you don't speak up and assert yourself because of this reason? Here's the thing, boundaries are for you, not for the other person. And when we can set boundaries for ourselves, we are actually showing ourselves that we value and love ourselves enough to be able to set boundaries. In this episode, my guest Jessica and I talk about the importance of setting boundaries and how to set them. To hear more, tune in to this week's episode. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Masks Off for People Pleasers and Perfectionists. I am Kim Gross, your host, and today I have with me Jessica Rabin, and I'm really excited for this conversation. I was on her podcast not long ago, and we just had a great connection. So I'm super excited to continue the conversation. And as always, I will begin with a quote. So the quote that Jessica offered is, boundaries are the distance at which I can love you and me simultaneously. Prentice Hemphill. Oh my gosh, I want to jump into the quote right away, but I'm going to hold off because I want you to introduce yourself first so that the listeners can know who you are and a little bit about you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on, Kim. Like you said, we had such a wonderful conversation on my podcast, like before, during, after. So I'm so excited to be here. But as you said, I'm Jessica Rabin. I am a licensed clinical psychologist in South Carolina. So I work in a children's hospital, primarily working with teens, but I do see all ages up till early young adulthood, primarily focusing on anxiety, depression, chronic illness, eating disorders, and LGBTQ plus health. Outside of that, I'm a wife, a mom, a dog mom. I create content on social media all about mental health, have my own podcast, and then I actually have a second podcast that I do with three of my mental health colleagues. So I like to say busy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You are super busy. And I love that we are going to have a conversation about talking about teens and young adults. So let's go back for a moment to the quote. Boundaries are the distance at which I can love you and me simultaneously. And I think that's such a profound quote because oftentimes, and again, this is masks off for people pleasers, right? So people pleasers tend to have the hardest time loving themselves at the same time they're loving someone else. By characteristic and trait, a people pleaser is putting the needs, wants, and desires of everybody else ahead of
Mhm.
themselves. So it's so difficult then to love me and love you at the same time. And
Mhm.
boundaries are the hardest thing for a people pleaser to set and then let alone hold them. They might
Mhm.
say, okay, I've done this so many times with my kids. They're 25 and 22 now. No, I am not making you dinner anymore. You're old enough, you make your own dinner. Do I hold that boundary? Hell
No.
no. Mom, he's
Yep.
25. Mom, what's for dinner? What's for lunch? What's for breakfast?
Mhm.
And I'm still doing it for my 25-year-old. Side note, I enjoy
Yep.
it. So that's why I still do. But back in the day, I resented it, right?
Mhm.
Because I was saying yes when I wanted to say no. So now let's take that and bring that over to what that experience can be like for teens and young
Mhm.
adults. What do you see in terms of, you said, first of all, you help teens that are anxious,
Mhm.
depressed, eating disorders. I'm guessing suicidal ideation,
Yep.
loneliness, relationship issues. So,
Mhm.
do you see a correlation and a bridge between how the teens are showing up for you in this hospital setting and the inability to have boundaries?
Oh, absolutely. So, first of all, I tell everybody boundaries are hard to set for anybody, like
Yes.
adults, children, teens alike. I think a lot of times what I've at least witnessed is teens were never modeled or told it's okay to set boundaries. So then when I'm coming in and we're talking about a situation, I'm like, oh, boundary setting would be really helpful. Here, they're like, one, how do I even do that? And two, oh, I couldn't possibly do that. That's not allowed. But thinking about like anxiety, depression, and obviously this is people mascot for people pleasers and perfectionists, which I see a ton because we know, especially with anxiety disorders, perfectionism, people pleasing all plays a role. The lack of boundaries makes their mental health worse. And then that's reinforcing not setting boundaries, even though somebody's anxious. Okay, I don't want to set a boundary because I'm scared they're going to upset me or be upset with me or not going to like me anymore or whatever it is. And then they don't set a boundary. But you brought up the word resent, and I'm so glad you brought that up because when we don't set boundaries, especially with other people, we tend to resent them, even though it's us not setting that boundary. So then that reinforces worsen anxiety, worsen mental health, all of those things. And it's just this vicious cycle. So hopefully I answered your question. I feel like I like
Yeah.
went
No,
15 different directions.
you absolutely did. And so we'd said, okay, so it shows up as anxiety, depression, and I can even think of like peer pressure, right? My
Hmm.
inability to set a boundary or to say no, because saying no is also a
Is
boundary. So my inability to say no when I was a teenager wreaked so much havoc in my life. I engaged in so many high risk behaviors as a
hmm
teenager that I didn't really want to engage in because I didn't have the ability to say no or set a boundary. And then if we go deeper, and so maybe you can speak on this, the other reason is that I wanted to fit in.
hmm
I wanted to be accepted and I wanted validation from my peers or from the guys, from the boys. So I would just say yes when everything in me wanted to say no
hmm
and talk about that creating anxiety.
Absolutely. So, one, we are social creatures, regardless of age, once again, but especially if we're thinking developmentally, that middle school, high school time is when youth, so I was going to say teens, but you can still be like a preteen in middle school. Youth are really seeking out those peer relationships, really breaking away from their parents' influence, figuring out who they are, what they like. And yeah, you want to be accepted. You don't want to be the kid that is made fun of, bullied, feels like an outcast. You brought up loneliness earlier. Like, it's not fun for anybody to be lonely, but especially I'm thinking like high school situation. So, yes, you might be saying yes to things you want to say no to because you want to be liked, you want to fit in. Then going back to the quote I shared, which that's one of my favorite quotes about boundaries out there. You're not loving yourself because you're
Mhm.
actively going against things that you value to
Yep.
fit in, things that really don't fit with the person you are. And then you start resenting your friends and your peer group, but you also want to fit in. And it's just this like never ending cycle. And then once
Cycle.
again, you feel anxious, depressed, maybe you feel guilty or shame, but then you're still engaging in those behaviors. And we can get into this as well. But then I think of like setting boundaries with teachers or parents or things like that, which is for many teens even scarier than
Let's
boundaries
talk
with
about
their
that.
peers.
Why is it so scary for a teen? Then what is your experience? What do they say to you when they come to you? I want to know what, if I could
Mhm.
be a fly on the wall, what are they saying about how they feel about their teachers, their coaches, their parents?
Yeah. So I think one reason it's scary is there's an innate power differential in many ways.
Yeah.
This is a teacher. I'm supposed to respect them. This is my parent. A lot of times, like with teachers, a lot what I hear is that they don't want to get in trouble, especially like my high achievers, like straight A students. I don't want to get in trouble, even though I disagree with this or this. I don't want to get in trouble. I don't want them to not write me a letter of recommendation for college, those type of things. With parents, a lot of times I hear, I don't even want to try because I know what they're going to say.
Mm.
And then I'll often challenge that, like, how do you know they're going to say that if you've never asked or never set that boundary before? I just know. And once again, it goes back to disappointing, especially thinking of my teens that fit into that people pleasing, perfectionistic type of person.
Category. Yep.
Yeah, category. That's a good word. Yeah, they don't want to disappoint, but also, like I said, there's that power differential. Coaches, same thing. Like if you are a starting player and you don't like what your coach is doing, or you feel like you're being pushed too hard, you may fear setting that boundary because you don't want to be now benched or whatever sport you're playing. You don't want to be taken out of that certain event. I did track, so that's what I'm thinking of, out of fear. And a lot of times, like I said, teens have never been modeled how to set boundaries or know that they could, so they don't even know how to approach it. And this is applicable to everybody, but one thing I hear a lot is, especially from teens, is that setting boundaries is mean, and I don't want to be mean. But setting boundaries is not mean.
It's
So if
not,
not,
it's
if you don't
loving
take
yourself.
anything else away from this episode, setting boundaries is not mean.
Absolutely, it's not. But I get why they say that and why they're thinking that. So that's what it looks like. That's how it
Mhm,
shows up, these problems. Let's go even deeper, a
mhm,
layer even deeper to when they were even younger. So they're afraid to speak up. They're
mhm,
afraid to say to the coach, hey, look, I love being starting forward or whatever, but this is too much. And so they keep their mouths quiet. They keep silent on it. They don't say to their parents, wow, that really hurt, or that was
mhm,
that flippant, sarcastic remark that you just made about my homework, about my bedroom, or about my outfit, even, or my weight. God forbid. That happens all the
mhm.
time,
Yeah.
is so hurtful. Like they can't say
Mhm,
that. So let's go even back further, deeper
mhm,
to what I like to talk about or describe is that core childhood wound of
mhm,
when the child, the teen, was a child, learned that it wasn't truly safe to
mhm,
speak up, speak out. How many times have children heard, how dare you say that? Or I'll give you something to cry about. Or
mhm,
that's not tolerable in my house. It's my way or the highway. All those types of things that parents will say when they're either in the heat of the moment because they're
mhm,
activated. And so they blurt these unconscious statements out, or they have been so conditioned from their own upbringing that it just seems normal and natural and they're just repeating a pattern. So that's what the parents are doing and why. But this is what's happening to the child. And because the child, as Gabor Mate says, that we will do everything in our power to stay attached to our
mhm.
caregivers rather than to stay attached to ourselves, that's trauma. When we
Yeah.
betray ourselves. And that's what I hear you saying, that these teens are saying to you. They're betraying rather than saying, hey, coach, you know what? 50 suicides is a bit much or whatever.
Yeah.
Or I keep getting injured because of blah, blah, blah. Maybe I need to, rather than speaking up and staying true to himself or herself, they don't. So do you want to speak on that?
Yeah, no, I love that you brought that up because I talk a lot if I'm working from a cognitive behavioral therapy model, and I'm very eclectic in my approach, but there's something called core beliefs. And these are beliefs that develop in early childhood, usually before age 7, about ourselves, other people in the world around us. And that was what was coming to mind when you were giving those examples. The example I was thinking is because I said so. So if children grow up in a home where they see the innate power differential. They're given these messages of, you're the child, I'm the adult, my way or the highway, like you said. They're going to learn, okay, it's not safe for me to speak up. And even if they're not getting those overt messages, kids are smart. I always say we do not give kids nearly enough credit,
No.
but they observe relationships and patterns around them. They know like adults are supposed to keep you safe. You're supposed to respect your elders, things like that. And so even if it's not an overt message, they will learn early on, oh, okay, this is not a time to speak up, or no, I can't talk to mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, whoever like that. Or what I hear a lot of times is and I know you've shared your story a lot, but one moment where the flip was switched for them. And it could be something as simple as, and this one actually has come up a couple times, so it's not like individual client information, that crying's not okay.
Mm.
And I'm like, why is crying not okay? I remember this one time when I was 5 years old and I spilt the milk and I started crying. And my dad said, why are you crying? It's just spilt milk. And from that moment on, I learned I can't cry. And I think it's the same thing with setting boundaries, whether it's a pattern over time or that one moment when they were a young child where they tried to speak up and were shut down, then they've internalized that as they go into teenage years, adulthood. Because I always tell people the core beliefs we developed in early childhood, and we can have positive core beliefs. That's wonderful. In therapy, we're not trying to address this. Positive core beliefs. We might try to enhance them, but we're not trying to challenge or change them. But if you grow up with a core belief that I cannot speak up, I cannot set boundaries because of X, Y, or Z, unless you actively work to challenge that core belief, figure out where it comes from, actively unlearn that, that's going to follow you throughout your entire life until you do challenge, address, or change it. And our core beliefs in childhood impact all areas of our lives as we grow up. Yeah.
I love that. And what I'm thinking about too, as you're saying that, and it's so profound what you're saying, but even think about how we sometimes, and you have little ones, right? So,
Mhm.
so even think about what we say sometimes as parents to a toddler, a 2-year-old. When a 2-year-old is like starting to, and again, you would know about this more than I, but the developmental stages, right? Like when a
Mhm.
2-year-old is trying to assert a little more independence, and I'll give you an example. When my son was 2, I made him or forced him to eat broccoli. And it was like, no, like at 2 year old, no, I'm not doing that. No. And what do we say to a 2-year-old? Don't you say no to me. Don't,
Yep.
how dare you say no? So, but saying no, even at 2, is them trying to set a boundary. So when my son
Mhm.
was like, I don't want to eat broccoli, and this is a true story, and I do share this story in my upcoming book, which is that I made him, and I'm so ashamed of this, but it is what it is. I just didn't know better at the
Mhm.
time. He's 25 now, but I made him sit at the dinner table strapped into his booster seat for 2 hours. He
Mhm.
cried because he wouldn't eat the broccoli, and he wouldn't eat it. And then finally, he was crying so much, I finally gave in, did not enforce my boundary of you have to eat, gave in. And what did I do? The only thing I accomplished was traumatizing my son in that
Mhm.
moment. So we don't even recognize, many of us. I certainly wasn't aware of what I was doing at the time.
Mhm.
So we have to, I think what we could maybe mention and talk about now is how can we start to shift this paradigm? I know it's not going to happen overnight. I know
Mhm.
parents aren't going to wake up and become conscious overnight. It's going to take time. And there's an alarm bell going off. I believe there's an epidemic going on with teens
Mhm.
and young adults with the amount of anxiety, depression, loneliness, addiction, toxic
Mhm.
relationship, burnout, overwhelm, whatever.
Mhm.
And I feel like it's plaguing our teens and young adults. So, how do we start to raise some awareness? Let's start with awareness to help parents.
Yeah. Oh, I love this and totally relatable having a toddler right now. I was like, and all, yeah. And, but so I guess raising awareness is one, speaking to parents, being aware of how you were raised, what you want to do similarly and what you want to do differently. Because the food thing I hear a lot, and even as someone who is a psychologist who works with eating disorders, who knows all the things, I still am like, just eat your broccoli, please. please eat the broccoli. You told
You
me you
have to
wanted
eat your
broccoli.
veggies.
Yeah. And like we've tried different things, but I think, yeah, awareness. I say this all the time, and I've heard you say it as well. Step one to any change in behavior is being aware of the behavior you have. But I think too, for parents, it's modeling those boundaries and giving your child permission to have boundaries. I have a 3-year-old, and there are definitely times that she will say no to us, which is asserting a boundary, but it's not necessarily an appropriate time, like bedtime. No, I don't want to go to bed. So we're like, okay, we understand that. However, we have to go to bed. But there may be other situations where your child can assert boundaries, and that is absolutely fine. So a big thing for us is if she doesn't want to hug or kiss us, a family member, we allow her to. Or we'll just say, oh, do you want to wave instead? You just want to say goodbye? Absolutely fine. Or if she's, mommy, don't touch me. I'm like, thank you for letting me. No, you don't want to be touched right now. And so I'm talking about toddlers right now, but finding ways that where it is a boundary that's not harmful in the sense of they're not running out into traffic, or it's not something where you are no longer parenting, reinforce that. Like, thank you so much for telling me that. For older kids, it's inviting them into a conversation of having their opinion or voice shared. So if you have teenagers and you're like, yeah, I don't know if I've ever really modeled setting boundaries, because I hear that a lot from parents. They're like, I've never set boundaries. So I don't even know where to start with my teenager on letting him or her know it's okay to set boundaries. It's inviting them in a conversation. This is my thoughts on this thing, but I want to hear your thoughts. What would you like? Or I noticed that you were a little upset when I did this. Can we talk about it? How can I do something different? Because that opens up a conversation and knows or communicates to your that you are a safe person to set boundaries with, that you're willing to hear their side and perspective. And I always tell parents it's never too late to change your behavior.
It isn't. I attest to that because again, mine are 25 and 22. And I did not have the consciousness when they were tweens, definitely with school age. I didn't. They were much older. And I can say that my daughter, it was like 6 months ago, maybe a year ago. So she's 21, almost 22.
Mm.
And I remember this conversation. She is doing her master's. I think I told you she's doing her
Mhm.
master's to become a
Yep.
licensed marriage and family therapist, but she's living in Boston. And so she still needed to have a part-time job to support her going out habits, her spending habits. Like we weren't going to give her money for that. And we were talking about what kind of jobs she could get. And I was under the notion that she should just take any job so she had money
Mhm.
coming in because I had this anxiety, worry, fear that she was going to go broke. And then I might have to really set a harder boundary by saying, sorry, I'm not giving you money because you're not getting a job. So there's my projection, right? So that's another
Mhm.
thing that parents have to watch for is when they are projecting their own emotions,
Mhm.
crap, whatever, onto their children. So that's another thing as well. So we're going back and forth, and the conversation's starting to get heated because every suggestion I offered, she was resisting, coming back with a no. Now,
Mhm.
okay, so it might have just been a little bit her setting a boundary, a little bit her own not wanting to get a job and resistance. So it's tricky, right? It's not that black
Mhm.
and white. But at one point in the conversation, she said, Mom, I appreciate that you're trying to help me, but I need to figure this out for myself and I need to do this on my own. And that was a boundary, right? That was a boundary.
Absolutely.
And so I stopped and I paused and I said, you know what? And because I've been doing enough of this work on myself and I've been practicing conscious communication with her, I was able to say, okay, pause. You know what, Ange? You're 100% right.
Mhm.
This is for you to figure out, and you will figure it out on your own. I have faith and trust in you that you will. And if you need anything from me, let me know. I'm here. That's a whole different conversation from what I would have done in the past would be, well, what do you mean? I'm just trying to help.
Mhm.
You don't have the life experience that I have. I know, or whatever I could have said to shut
Mhm.
her down, cut her off, and dismiss her experience and her trying to set a boundary with me.
Yeah. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And also, I just want to give your daughter credit because the boundary she set was so beautiful in the sense that it truly was a boundary in that she communicated what she needed. She didn't say,
Yep.
"Mom, stop." She said, "I need to do this on my own." And we haven't really defined what a boundary is. It's a limit that you set.
Yeah.
But when I'm teaching boundary setting with especially my teens, I always encourage them to communicate what they need and what's in their control. So what Ange, I want to
Angela.
make
Yeah.
Angela did there was saying, "This is what I need to do." She didn't say, "Mom, stop." Yes, technically that's a boundary,
Yes.
but she can't really control if you stopped or not, but she can control her saying, "I need to do this on my own. Like, I'm gonna make this choice on my own." And I think that's a really big distinction because a lot of times going back to that misconception that boundaries are mean, they can be if you're not setting them properly. If I'm sitting here saying, "You need to do this," that's not a boundary, that's a command, versus saying, "If you continue to do this, I'm gonna get up and leave the situation because it's making me uncomfortable," because you're in control of getting up and leaving the situation. So I just wanted to highlight that because I thought your daughter's boundary was so beautifully stated, and your response was beautiful as well. And I don't know, obviously you just shared your response, but I don't know how that felt for you or if it took pause. But a lot of times when people set boundaries, it may initially to the other person be like, "Oh," but then you reflect on it and you're like, "Okay, this is something they need to do for themselves. It's not a me thing."
Yes, I hear what you're saying, and there was a point in time, a long time ago, where that would have triggered me even more. Ooh, oh my gosh, she's firing back. But now when I took that pause, because I want to be able to take responsibility
Mhm.
for my side and I want to be clean with my kids, that overrides the fact that she set a boundary with me or she didn't want to hear my advice anymore. And furthermore, I know that it's more about her needs, not my needs.
Yeah.
So that was important. But I want to just also go back to what you said because I'm so glad that you did. That's a huge distinction. So important to underline, highlight that boundaries are for us,
Mhm.
not for the other person. They're always for us. And then that ties right back into the quote that
Mhm.
boundaries are the distance at which I can love you, me simultaneously. Because when you set a boundary for yourself, then you are loving yourself and
Mhm.
you are holding yourself in the highest standard. And at the same time, then you're allowing the other to be their highest self as well.
Mhm. Absolutely. And I tell people all the time, you can't control the behaviors of other people. You
Yeah.
can't control the reactions and responses. So if your attempt at boundary setting, and obviously I'm pretty sure we'll get into like how do we even set boundaries, what that looks like. But if your attempt to boundary set is telling other people what to do, that's not a boundary and that's
No.
outside of your control. Going back to teens, I talk with teens all the time about boundaries with social media because I mean it's a huge thing and talk about anxiety, depression, but like a boundary on social media might be, limiting screen time or blocking people, things like that. But I can't, if I'm a teen, I can't go on to social media. I can and say, "Stop being mean to me in the comments,"
Yep.
because I can't control what somebody else is doing. But what I can say is, if you continue to do this behavior, I'm going to block you or just block the person. Unfollowing content that makes you feel bad about yourself. You can't go to that creator and say, "Stop posting this content. It
Right.
makes me feel bad." You have to set that boundary for yourself of, "Hey, this makes me feel bad. I'm going to set the boundary with myself to unfollow the content." And so I give those examples because I think a lot of times social media is easier to see that distinction of
Very
like
much
what I
so.
need versus in relationships. But the same goes for relationships, whether it's with a friend, a romantic partner, a parent. It's you communicating your needs and if you want to take it a step further, what you're going to do. I always give an example if somebody's talking negatively to another person, "Hey, whenever you say these things to me, it makes me feel really uncomfortable." So I would appreciate if you stopped. That's your need. You need the person to stop, feel uncomfortable, but you can't say, "Hey, you need to stop doing this." It's if you continue to do this, I'm going to do this, or I'm going to distance myself from this relationship because I've recognized that it's negatively impacting my mental health, whatever it may be. There's so many ways to set boundaries, but to anybody listening, if you are like questioning, is this a boundary or not? Does it communicate what you need and what you can do in that situation?
Yeah, I love that because at the end of the day, what you are describing is the serenity prayer is that you cannot control people, places, and things. You can only control or change yourself and how you
Yeah.
respond. And that's the difference in life. So being able to do that. Now, let's just say we'll just take it one step further and maybe round out here. So a person is listening, they understand that the boundary is for themselves. They can only control themselves. They can't control another person. Let's just say someone who is listening still has fear,
Mm-hmm.
this fear, this block, whether it's a teen, a young adult, or a wife that has to set a boundary with her husband, or an employee has to set a boundary with his or her boss. But there's so much fear, even though they know
Mm-hmm.
that the boundary that they have the set is for themselves, they still, I can't do
Yeah.
it. What do you suggest there in terms of why? Two things. Why is it so important for them to at least try and
Mm-hmm.
break through? And then secondly, what's one beginning baby step that they can take?
Yeah. One, I'm going to validate anybody listening that's fearful of setting boundaries because it is really scary. So, for your first question, why is it so important to set the boundary? Okay. You know what you feel like with not setting the boundary. And I want to encourage you to reflect on that. Are you feeling anxious? Are you feeling overwhelmed? Are you feeling stressed? Are you feeling resentful? If you continue not setting boundaries, you are going to continue feeling that way. It's not going to miraculously get better
No.
if you're not communicating with the people you need to set boundaries with. So, yes, it's scary to set boundaries, but what could setting that boundary take off your plate? Could it make you feel less stressed, less anxious? Are you like, I don't know, overloaded with commitments, and removing one commitment is going to free up time so that you can actually sleep or relax? Like, really conceptualize, okay, this is how I feel not setting boundaries. What is the potential of how I can feel if I do start setting boundaries? What are the benefits? Because really, although a person initially, when you set a boundary with them, may be upset, at the end of the day, setting boundaries isn't going to make you feel worse overall. It's not going to create more stress, anxiety, overwhelm. Yeah, that person may respond negatively, but that's on them if they do.
And you know what?
Oh,
If they really, sorry, I didn't mean to
no.
interrupt, but if they really do care about you and there's someone that, you want to keep in your life, they will eventually, they'll know energetically that you setting that boundary is the healthy thing. And chances are they want to be able to be doing the same thing,
Mm-hmm.
right? If they
Yep.
really are a reasonable human being, they're going to get it. It's just that it's
Mm-hmm.
going to take a while because they're so used to the old dance that you did where you didn't set boundaries. They're used to
Yeah.
a dance with you where they could manipulate you, control you, instill fear, and know
Mm-hmm.
that your boundaries are wishy-washy and that you're probably not going to hold it. But
Yeah.
at the end of the day, deep, deep down, that other person that you might be fearing to set the boundary with knows that what you're doing is
Yeah.
totally within reason.
Oh, and I love that you brought that up. And just to add one more piece before I answer your second question, going off of that, if it is a person really close to you, like a spouse or a parent or a sibling, and you feel comfortable getting more vulnerable, lead with, hey, I have noticed I've been really stressed, overwhelmed, insert whatever it is you've been feeling. And I've been thinking about what would help me. And then go into the boundary because that gives them some context. Because if it is a person that really cares about you, they're going to want you not to feel that way. And a lot of times, especially if you've never set boundaries, people are oblivious that you are feeling that way. So I just
Exactly.
wanted to add
Yeah, I
to
love
that.
that you added that.
But as for like first steps, I tell people start small. And with my teens, a lot of times it is something like start setting boundaries in a text message. So if you get
Mhm.
invited to go out with friends and your gut is, I don't really want to go, just say, hey, I'm not up to going out. Thanks for the invite. That's a boundary. You don't have to lie. You don't have to make up an excuse. You don't have to say you're busy. Thanks for the invite. I'm going to pass. That's a boundary. Saying no is a boundary. So find things that can be like small, like baby steps to see how that feels for you. Start with yourself. If you're too scared to start with boundaries with other people, start with yourself. Hey, I need to really reduce my screen time. So I'm going to set limits. It could be something as simple as expressing where you want to go for dinner. If your partner asks, instead of saying, I don't know, I'm talking about myself here. But it could be like, actually, I'm really craving Chinese food. Or if your partner's, hey, I was thinking about grabbing Mexican and you really don't want Mexican food, be like, instead of saying, okay, and not enjoying your dinner, be like, I'm not actually feeling that tonight. Is there anything else you want to eat? Those are boundaries. And I would always encourage people to start there, see how it felt to assert something small, get a sense of how the other person responded. Because if your partner's, oh, yeah, if you don't want Mexican, yeah, let's get this. And you're like, oh, they listened to me. There was no big argument, fear. It wasn't nearly as anxiety provoking. That's going to open the door to be willing to set those larger, maybe more scary boundaries.
I love that. And then just as like a way to land the plane, so to speak. So I would add by starting out small and trying
Mhm.
those out and building confidence in
Mhm.
setting those, it will over time, and I'm not going to lie to the listeners and say it's like a light switch, it's going to happen overnight, especially if you've been struggling for a long time. But over time, as you take those baby steps that you just outlined, build the confidence. The real testament to having boundaries is when you energetically feel it. Sometimes you
Mhm.
don't even have to say it. You just embody the boundary, or you can just say one time, I don't eat Mexican food, and you let your
Mhm.
partner know that one time, and maybe every other time before you used to make yourself. But if when you
Mhm.
get in alignment with the fact that you are worthy to stand up for yourself and to assert yourself, and you don't have to acquiesce, when you believe that and embody that, and you say that next time, sorry, honey, I just don't do Mexican. It's not going to be an argument. There's not going to
Mhm.
be a problem. It's just going to be like, oh, okay, let's move on. Let's have
Mhm.
Italian. Let's have fish or whatever.
Yeah.
That's just an example. But that's the true testament to boundary
Mhm.
setting, is when you embody that you are worthy of setting them and holding them.
Absolutely. And I know we're wrapping up, but to add on to that, once you start embodying them, that sets the expectation for how others are going to approach you and see you. And so they're not going to keep trying to push Mexican food on you. I know we're using that as an example, but as an example in my life, I remember work boundaries have always been so hard for me because I am a people pleaser, but I also, love my work and I love working in a team and things like that. And I have this distinct memory years ago. I got three new consults on a Friday afternoon, and I went to the physician and I was like, I can't see all three. There's no way I can complete three new consults on a half day. Where can I prioritize? Who do I want to see first? And the physician was like, oh, this one, you can see this one Monday. And I was like, oh, that was a lot easier than I thought. And from that point forward, that was like the embodiment point that you were just talking about. I no longer was scared or felt afraid to say, no, I can't complete this consult right now. Because I used to always, I would stay late, bend over backwards if I got a last minute consult. And it's now I just say, I'll get to that tomorrow. Thank you so much for putting it in. And nobody flinches. Nobody is, oh my gosh, you're not doing that, your job, anything like that, because I've set that expectation. And so that can apply to anything. If you're setting boundaries always around food or work or family time, I know you have a lot of listeners that have
Yeah.
families. Once you start setting that and embodying, that's the expectation that you have set for yourself. Other people are going to respect that. And if they don't respect that, they're not the people for you. I know that sounds like really harsh, but like obviously if they're really
Yeah.
close, you have conversations, but like friends and stuff that maybe were out of alignment in the beginning and then you start setting boundaries, you know, you want to surround yourself with people that respect your boundaries. And once you embody that, those will be the people you attract in your circle.
So thank you so much for sharing that story because that was an awesome example. Gave me chills. So freaking good. So tell us, where can the listeners find you if they want to learn more about you? This was just such an awesome conversation. They should certainly follow you on TikTok, but where else can they find you?
Yeah, so TikTok and Instagram, my handle is at Jessica Lee, PhD. Lee is Leigh. My Instagram has all of my links and stuff. So I usually tell people to go there. My podcast is called Psych Talk. So it's all about psychology, mental health, self growth. Like Kim said, she was already on my podcast. Go listen to her episode. And then my other podcast is Welcome to Group Therapy. So you can find both podcasts on every major platform.
Oh my gosh, so amazing. Just like we said before with your podcast, where we just kept talking, I could go on and talk about this so much more. And you're my third one for the day. And I'm still like, I want to still keep talking about this
Oh,
stuff because I love it. So
yes.
thank you so much for being a guest today.
Thank you for having me, Kim. This is great. It flew by. I always enjoy talking to you.
Thank you so much. Okay, everybody, until next time on Masks Off for People Pleasers and Perfectionists, have a great week. So there you have it. The reason for setting boundaries, why we need to set them and how. I do hope that this episode brought you value and information on how to set boundaries. It can be so hard. I get it. I have struggled myself in the past with the ability to set a boundary and to hold a boundary. And what I can say for sure is that I have learned through my own journey of healing that setting a boundary for myself is a way, as the quote in the beginning of the episode stated, that it is a way for me to love myself and to love the other simultaneously. And when we can't set boundaries and we don't set boundaries, most likely we're going to end up feeling resentful and we're going to have unfulfilling relationships with other people because of that resentment. Or we may suffer from anxiety and depression, as we discussed throughout the episode. If you found this episode to be helpful, I would love for you to subscribe or to follow so that it can help to push this content out and help more people and spread the message of the importance of taking off our masks and being our true selves. And if you have comments, feel free to share them with me. And if you are wondering how you can take this work a step further and you want to really go deep with understanding why and how you struggle to set boundaries, you can go to my website, kimgrosscoaching.com, and you can find my calendar link there and sign up for a free 30-minute session. And we can talk about how I can guide you to being able to embody those boundaries, just as Jessica and I talked about in this episode.